Night hung heavily over the French countryside on November 7, 1944, the kind of cold, moonless night where even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Rain drummed softly against steel as a column of American Sherman tanks crept along a muddy road near the village of Morville-les-Vicq. Their engines rumbled like distant thunder. Inside the lead tank, illuminated only by the faint glow of instrument gauges, sat Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, one hand gripping the periscope handles, the other resting near the .50 caliber mount. His face was set with calm focus, a quiet readiness built from years of fighting battles he was never supposed to fight. Rivers belonged to the 761st Tank Battalion, the first African-American armored unit ever deployed into combat by the United States Army. Painted on the side of each tank was a Black Panther, claws extended, eyes narrowed as if leaping forward into the darkness ahead. The men who rode inside those tanks carried a similar defiant energy, hardened by segregation, sharpened by doubt, sustained by a determination forged from being told again and again that they were not fit for combat. But tonight they would prove the world wrong. The battalion had been held in reserve for days as Allied intelligence assessed the German defensive network east of Nancy. The enemy, composed of hardened Wehrmacht units recovering from earlier defeats, believed they understood the American order of battle. They expected white units. They expected familiar divisions. What they did not expect, what they had no tactical preparation for, was a highly trained tank battalion of African-American soldiers who had been drilling relentlessly for 2 years and waiting for the moment to prove themselves. The rain intensified as the men advanced toward the forest line. To their right, infantry from the 26th Division marched quietly, boots sinking into mud, rifles slung across shoulders. The smell of wet earth, diesel fuel, and cold metal filled the air. Somewhere ahead, in the darkness, the Germans watched from fortified positions. They did not yet know who was approaching them. They did not know that within hours, their assumptions about American armor and American racial policies would be shattered. The story leading to this night stretched back long before the battalion's arrival in France. Formed in April 1942 at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, the 761st Tank Battalion was composed entirely of African-American soldiers led mostly by white officers, as required by Army segregation policies. Despite the institutional racism embedded into every stage of their training, the men excelled. They studied tank warfare with precision, learning to maneuver Shermans in tight formations, fire on the move, and coordinate with infantry under intense pressure. Their instructors recognized their talent. Soldiers from other units recognized it too. But recognition alone was not enough to overcome the prejudice that kept them from deployment for more than 2 years. They trained without being sent to the battlefield. Repeated requests for combat deployment were denied. Some officers openly questioned whether African Americans possessed the discipline or intelligence to operate complex armored machinery. The men heard these criticisms. They felt them deeply, and with every insult their resolve hardened. Their turning point came when their capabilities could no longer be ignored. By late 1944, Allied commanders needed fresh armored units to push through German defensive lines in Lorraine. General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, was known for his strict discipline and uncompromising expectations of combat performance. He was also known infamously for his racial biases. When he first addressed the battalion, he did not hide his skepticism, telling them, "I don't care what color you are, as long as you go out there and kill the enemy." The words were harsh, but they were also the final doorway the 761st needed. Permission to fight. Now, under Patton's Third Army, they moved into position for their first combat assignment, breaking the German lines near Morville, a region fortified with anti-tank guns, mines, and entrenched infantry. Intelligence reports warned of German Panther and Mark IV tanks hidden in the dense woodland beyond the ridgeline. The enemy believed their defenses were prepared. They believed they understood the typical structure of U.S. armored forces. What they did not believe What they could not imagine was that African-American tankers would be leading the charge as the 761st advanced. Rainwater trickled down the helmets of the tank commanders. Visibility dropped, yet the battalion pressed forward. The rhythmic clank of treads echoed across fields once used for harvest but now scarred by cratered earth. Rivers's tank rolled steadily at the front, its gun ready, its crew tense but unwavering. They had waited too long for this moment to fear it. In the villages nearby, French civilians huddled in their homes, listening to the rumbling approach of tanks. They had heard rumors of an all-black American unit, and some doubted it. Segregation was so deeply embedded in American society that even Europeans found the idea difficult to imagine. But the truth was advancing toward them in the rain. As they neared the German defensive perimeter, an explosion split the night. An anti-tank shell slammed into the ground just meters from the column. German gunners had opened fire. Tracers streaked through the darkness. The forest erupted in muzzle flashes. Rivers shouted orders. His tank surged forward. This was the first combat engagement of the 761st Tank Battalion. This was the moment that would change how the Germans understood American armored forces. This was the moment that would begin forcing the Nazis to reconsider their assumptions, their intelligence assessments, and eventually their entire frontline strategy. And as the battalion plunged into the firelit darkness of the Lorraine battlefield, every man inside those tanks knew that the eyes of a doubting army, a doubting nation, and a doubting enemy were upon them, and that tonight they would answer with steel. The battle for Morville began with thunder, thunder. As the first German shells tore into the ground around them, the men of the 761st Tank Battalion felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with crossing the line between expectation and reality. For years they had trained for this moment. Now, under the fierce glow of enemy tracers cutting through the rain, they were no longer the doubted or the untested. They were tankers in the crucible of war. Inside the cramped turret of his Sherman, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers steadied himself as the tank lurched forward. Smoke seeped through the periscope. His gunner, Corporal Curtis, waited for a firing command. The air smelled of hot metal, sweat, and the sharp tang of cordite. Every second counted. Rivers barked a firing order. The 75mm cannon roared, the recoil shaking the turret as the shell streaked into the darkness and detonated against a German machine gun nest. Flames erupted. The infantry advancing behind the tanks cheered. This was the human face of the battle. Men under crushing pressure, confined in armored machines that became ovens in the summer and freezers in the winter, fighting with a level of discipline honed from years of being told they were not good enough. But the 761st did not fight with anger alone. Their strength came from something deeper, a determination not just to win the battle, but to rewrite history's expectations of African American soldiers. Tactically, the battalion faced one of the most dangerous forms of warfare in the European theater, woods fighting against a deeply entrenched enemy. The forests of Lorraine were thick, the visibility poor, and the terrain ideal for hidden anti-tank guns. The German defenders, veterans of the Eastern Front and previous clashes with Allied armor, understood how to ambush Shermans. They positioned 75mm pack guns behind tree trunks, angled to hit from the sides, where Shermans were weakest, but the Germans did not expect the speed and aggression of the 761st. The battalion had trained relentlessly for fluid armored maneuver. Their instructors taught them to keep moving, to fire on the move, and to maintain tight coordination with infantry. Unlike some American tank units that favored cautious advancement, the Black Panthers pushed hard and fast. Refusing to give German gunners time to reload, Rivers's tank was the first to punch through the initial line, followed closely by D Company. In minutes, the Germans found themselves under unexpected pressure. Reports later recovered from German field officers show surprise at the Americans' fast-paced armor thrust in the rain. They had assumed the weather would slow Allied tanks. They had assumed the new battalion would be green. They assumed incorrectly. From the German perspective, the confusion was immediate. Their intelligence had no record of an African-American armored battalion operating in the area. Nazi ideology insisted that black soldiers lacked discipline and military capability. This ideological blindness prevented them from properly preparing for the reality now advancing toward them experienced. Highly trained tankers fighting with a unity and resolve that shattered every racist assumption German planners had made. German officers later recounted their shock. One captured commander admitted that the Americans, pressing them at Morville, fought with an aggressiveness not previously encountered in this sector. Another report from the 11th Panzer Division described unexpected American armor strength and skilled crews who closed ground rapidly. They did not know these tankers were African American until much later. Only after the battle did German intelligence officers begin piecing together that the force which smashed their positions belonged to the 761st, revelation that challenged Nazi racial doctrine itself. Back inside the American lines, leadership played a crucial role in the battalion's early success. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, the battalion commander, had fought relentlessly against attempts to reassign his tankers out of combat. He believed in their ability when many others doubted them. Bates often visited his men in the field, speaking with them directly, reinforcing their worth not only as soldiers but as pioneers. His leadership created an environment where the men's resilience, discipline, and technical skill could thrive. Patton's role was complex. Initially skeptical, he quickly came to rely heavily on the 761st. As their early victories mounted, he praised them publicly, an extraordinary gesture from someone known for his hardline opinions. He sent them into some of the toughest fighting sectors because he trusted them to succeed. The men of the 761st understood this. They carried the weight of representing their race, their unit, and their commander's faith every time they rolled forward. Psychologically, the battle had another layer, one that cut deeper than bullets. As African American tankers, the men fought two wars simultaneously. One war was against the Germans across muddy fields and dark forests. The second war was against the prejudice inside their own army. They wore the same uniform as every American soldier but were denied service in the same restaurants, forced to use segregated facilities, and subjected to doubts about their intelligence and courage. This made their resolve fiercer. They understood that victory in battle would strike not only at the Germans, but at the very ideology used to keep them marginalized. One tanker later said, "We fought Hitler, but we also fought Jim Crow, and we intended to beat both." As the hours passed, the 761st's momentum grew. They overran German positions, captured villages, rescued pinned-down infantry, and kept the offensive moving despite heavy resistance. At one point, a German counterattack attempted to isolate their spearhead. Instead of withdrawing, the battalion pivoted and engaged with such precision that the Germans withdrew in confusion. Prisoners later admitted that they had assumed elite white units were attacking. The truth stunned them. By nightfall, the 761st had broken through the German line. Reports sent to higher German headquarters acknowledged that American armor had executed an unexpected breakthrough. Nazi commanders, confronted with this reality, began reassessing their strategic assumptions about American tank forces and the supposed limitations of African American troops. The battlefield fell quiet. But for the 761st Tank Battalion, the war had only begun. The decisive moment came in the cold gray light of a November morning when the 761st Tank Battalion found itself thrust into one of the most dangerous assignments of the Lorraine campaign. After days of brutal fighting around Morville, the German defensive network began to wobble, but had not yet collapsed. Wehrmacht commanders, recognizing the threat posed by the relentless American advance, ordered a full armored reinforcement to the sector. Their assumption that they were fighting standard U.S. armored units led them to believe they could halt the push with a concentrated counterstrike. But the Germans had made a critical miscalculation. They did not understand the enemy in front of them. They did not understand the determination of the 761st Tank Battalion. At dawn, Fog clung to the fields like a wet shroud. The ground was churned into thick mud from days of rain and tank movement. Rivers of gray water pooled in craters left by artillery shells. And through this bleak landscape rolled the Shermans of the 761st, their engines growling through the fog, their tracks cutting deep grooves into the earth. Ahead of them, hidden beyond the haze, German tank Panthers and Mark Ives waited in ambush positions. It was in these moments, crouched inside steel coffins, vision limited to a narrow slit of the world, that the tankers of the 761st faced their most dangerous challenge yet. The Germans opened fire first. A Panther tank fired from a concealed ridge, its 75mm shell slamming into the lead Sherman of D Company. Flames erupted. The tank's crew scrambled out, some injured, some burned. But instead of retreating, the 761st surged forward. This was the turning point, the moment when the battalion's speed, training, and sheer audacity forced the Germans to realize that their assumptions were catastrophically wrong. Reuben Rivers, who had already earned admiration throughout the battalion for his fearless leadership, now stepped into legend. His tank, already damaged from previous engagements, took a hit that ripped open part of the hull and left him with a severe leg wound. Blood soaked through his uniform, but he refused evacuation. "I ain't going nowhere," he shouted over the radio. "Tankers, move." The battalion pushed harder than ever before. Rivers led from the front, firing while maneuvering aggressively to keep German gunners off balance. His tank absorbed further damage, but he continued to call targets for the battalion, directing fire with absolute clarity. His refusal to withdraw held the American formation together in a moment. When collapse seemed possible, German officers watching the battlefield were stunned. Their reports revealed genuine disbelief. One German lieutenant wrote that the American tankers attacked with reckless bravery and closed distances too quickly for accurate firing. Another report noted the unexpected discipline and speed of the advancing Shermans. The Nazis had built their military doctrine around racial hierarchy, believing that African American troops lacked the capability to operate complex machinery or execute coordinated maneuvers. Their entire assessment fell apart in the face of the 761st. In this decisive battle near the village of Morville and later at the town of Chateau Salins, the 761st shattered German counterattacks, destroyed numerous anti-tank guns, and forced the enemy to withdraw. It was here that they proved themselves not merely capable, but exceptional. Their aggression broke the stalemate and opened the route for the Third Army to continue its advance, but the cost was heavy. Staff Sergeant Rivers, despite his heroism, did not live to see the end of the day. His tank advanced to cut off a retreating German force, but in doing so, he became exposed to an anti-tank gun hidden behind a stone wall. The shell struck with lethal precision. The explosion consumed the vehicle. Rivers was killed instantly, yet his sacrifice prevented the Germans from launching another counterstrike that could have endangered hundreds of American infantrymen. His actions later earned him the Medal of Honor awarded, posthumously nearly 50 years later, a testament to both the heroism he displayed and the long shadow of discrimination that delayed formal recognition. As news of the battalion's breakthrough spread through the German ranks, it had a ripple effect on their broader strategic calculations. German commanders issued new directives warning of aggressive American armored battalions, capable of outmaneuvering and overwhelming their positions. Reports from field intelligence units noted the presence of Negro Panzer units, fighting with a skill level that contradicted Nazi racial ideology. Though the term was crude, the implication was clear. The enemy they faced was far more formidable than their doctrine had prepared them for. This realization forced German units to adopt more cautious defensive postures in sectors where the 761st was believed to be operating. There were instances where German patrols avoided direct engagement with American armor after learning of the battalion's involvement. Nazi racial propaganda, once absolute, had been broken not through rhetoric but through sheer battlefield excellence. After the breakthrough in Lorraine, the 761st Tank Battalion continued its advance across France and into Belgium. They fought in the freezing hell of the Battle of the Bulge, where their tanks plowed through snow and ice to relieve besieged Allied positions. They liberated towns, crossed multiple enemy lines, and eventually rolled into Germany itself. By war's end, the battalion had spent 183 consecutive days in combat. Longer than most armored units in the European theater, they destroyed hundreds of enemy vehicles, captured enemy positions once deemed impregnable, and earned more than 300 Purple Hearts. Their bravery shaped not just battles but the very psychology of American and German forces. Soldiers who had once questioned their capability came to rely upon them. Commanders who once doubted them now praised them, and German officers who had once dismissed them now reconsidered their battlefield assumptions entirely. In the aftermath of the war, however, the men of the 761st returned to a nation still divided by segregation. Many were denied access to restaurants they had helped defend. Some struggled to find employment. Their heroism remained unrecognized for decades, but the legacy of their service continued to grow, shaping the path toward the eventual desegregation of the American military in 1948. Reflecting on their story, it becomes clear why the 761st Tank Battalion holds such a crucial place in World War II history. They shattered the expectations of two armies, the American army that doubted them and the German army that underestimated them. They fought not only against the Wehrmacht but against the weight of centuries of prejudice. And they did so with excellence that forced the Nazis to reconsider their strategy, their assumptions, and their ideology. Their tanks rolled through Europe, but their legacy rolled far beyond it. They proved that courage has no color, that skill is not bound by prejudice, and that the fight for dignity can be waged with both steel and soul. Their story is a reminder that history is not only shaped by the battles we remember, but by the soldiers who fought to be remembered.